Let me invite you, if you have a Bible, to turn to the book of John. If you are new to the Bible, this is the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. John chapter 4, we're going to pick up in a little bit in verse 27. And today is a special day. If you are brand new, and I know I've met a couple of you already, brand new to Redeemer, just want to hopefully encourage you that I really hope that you're moved, that you're encouraged by what you witnessed today. But also, if you've been around for a while, you know that we started out Redeemer about 9 years ago, and we've been portable ever since, meaning we have rented space at Midland Christian, set up and tear down. And I think I said this last week, I can always tell when it's somebody's first time, especially in the kids area, to witness everything that goes on. Their eyes are just like saucers and like, oh my gosh, this is so incredibly complex, so much work, so much moving pieces. It's a lot. And so we walked through a really fun thing about 2 years ago where God just kind of led us as a church and gave us some land, and we began a process that we called First to the Lord. And we walked through this a bit last year. We looked at 2 Corinthians chapter 8 and 9. And if you missed that, I would encourage you to go back and catch the podcast from last week. We're just talking about what does it mean, how does God fund his mission on planet Earth and through the local church and even in Midland, Texas, and talking about some generosity and sacrifice. So if you're new, I really do believe that you picked a special day because you're going to see a lot of people that God has changed their lives and really want to be invested and believe in what God is doing. But if you are, I don't want to say old, but that's like the opposite of new. If you're, what's a better word? A veteran. If you're a seasoned veteran and you've been around and you were here for this last year, I think you picked a good Sunday as well. I think you're going to be encouraged. But what I want to do, my main goal this morning, just kind of all cards on the table, is just simply to remind us why. The why behind the what is so important. What is driving this? Why are we doing this? Why was Jesus here on mission? What mission has he given us? And so we're going to go to John chapter 4. And this is kind of a two-part story. We get a picture of Jesus one day at this well. And most of the time when you see this story, it's entitled The Woman at the Well. That might be even the subtitle in your Bible. Because a lot of times that's what we focus on. That's definitely an incredible story at the front half. But we're going to focus a lot of time this morning on the second part of that story, which we're endearingly calling the disciples at the well. So I'm going to catch up to speed and just kind of tell a bit of the story of Jesus interacting with this woman at the well. And then we will look at the text and pick up in the second part when she kind of leaves the scene, stage left, disciples come in, stage right, and a really interesting thing that I think is so timely and important for us in this season. This took place fairly early on in Jesus' ministry, so he would have been roughly 31 years old, and he was headed at one point from the kind of south region of Israel, which was known as Judah or Judea, and he was headed up north into Galilee. And I like maps, so I thought a map might be helpful for you, but there was a little piece of land between there called Samaria. So he's down in this Judea area and he's moving up. He wants to get to Galilee, but he has to go through Samaria, which if you know much about first century Jewish world, that was kind of perceived as enemy territory. There was a huge chasm between Jews and Samaritans. So much so that I think it's hard to explain just how much animosity and hatred there was between the two. Because the Jews saw the Samaritans basically as some type of a half-breed, honestly. They were half Jewish, but their ancestors had kind of intermingled with the Assyrians, which were the absolute enemy of the Jewish people. And so they kind of mixed those two religions, mixed those two nationalities, and they kind of have this whole Samaritan thing that was created. And so for a long time, there was just hatred, animosity. The Jews would call them dogs, would honestly treat them as subhuman people. The Jewish people didn't even think that Samaritans deserved to partake in the resurrection at the last days. They hated them so much. If you remember the story where Jesus was going into a Samaritan village and his disciples were with him and they were a little bit less than hospitable. And so James and John, they're so frustrated. They say, all right, Jesus, you just give us the green light and we're going to call down fire and we're going to burn this place to the ground, okay? Like, we should take note, like, oh my gosh, even the disciples should have known better than to try to burn entire places to the ground, but it didn't even blip on their radar because they had them in such a different category. And so Jesus was very purposefully going through not just Samaria, but a town called Sychar that had Jacob's well. You can reach way back to your Old Testament and just see some of the incredible things that happened around Jacob's well. But when Jesus gets there, he has a very interesting encounter with what we endearingly call the Samaritan woman. This woman was incredibly broken by life. You see later in the story that she had 5 different marriages, and all of those sounds like, if you read into the text, ended in divorce, and she was living with a man that was not her husband, and she was probably very lonely and full of shame because John goes out of his way to say she went to the well to get water in the middle of the day, which is not when everybody else would go. All the other women would go. Anybody else getting water would go early when it was cool or late when it was cool. She was probably isolated to the middle of the day because no one wanted to be around her in a small town like that. You could imagine the reputation that she might have had. She was running, as sin often does. She was trying to hide from Jesus. She's dodging his questions a little bit. When he starts asking her about her past, she's trying to kind of do some maneuvering around it. But Jesus saw her in such a different way than anybody else because Jesus was a man on a mission. Jesus believed he had been given a very clear mission from God, and so I would love for you to think about it like just this metaphor for the rest of the morning. He had these lenses on that were these missional lenses, where he believed he was here to do specific work that God has given him, and he wasn't going to get distracted, and that changed the way he saw things and people and opportunities. He saw that woman very differently than the disciples did because he was wearing very different lenses. He engaged her, he acknowledged her, he shared the gospel with her. He draws out her sin. I think that's a really interesting, important part of this story. He doesn't want her to kind of get away feeling like she'd done nothing wrong. Like all of us, Jesus wanted her and wants us to feel the weight of what we've done because that's important if he's about to lift that weight off of her shoulders. So he has this interesting interaction with her, and he uses this metaphor of thirst. I think he's trying to obviously play off of her physical thirst and try and show her that she is looking for something, that her soul is thirsty and longing for something. And he basically says, like, you drink of this water, then you're going to be back tomorrow because you're going to be thirsty again. And it takes her a little bit to pick up on the metaphor, but basically he says, I've got a different kind of water that if you drink of this water and if you know of the free gift of God, you will never be thirsty again. I'm going to tease this out a little bit later because this is so wise of Jesus, and this statement about our soul's thirst for something is universal. Like humans have something in their soul that's longing for something that maybe we don't even have a word for. It's a thirst, and she had obviously been trying to quench that thirst through relationships with men, whether that was just relationships, maybe that was sexual, maybe that was a security part of her culture. But whatever she was expecting to find, Jesus could tell she wasn't finding it. She's still thirsty. And he's basically saying, like, you're longing for this water that when you drink it, you'll never thirst again. And then at some point in this conversation, she realizes Jesus was a prophet when he starts telling her all about her life, and she kind of takes a pause. And then she has this moment where now everything has been removed, and she's just kind of exposed. Her life has been exposed, and she says something that is, I've read this and preached this text a lot of times over the last 30 years. But for the first time, I saw something this week that it says that she was looking for the Messiah. She's like, oh, Jesus, yeah, I'm broken, I'm thirsty, I'm longing for these things, and we're waiting for the Messiah. And when he comes, he's going to fix everything. He's going to redeem everything. It's kind of this super climactic moment then when Jesus gets to say, that's me. Like, I am the one that you're looking for, but you didn't even know it. You think about their culture, you think about our culture, you can see in Midland this thirst expressed, that longing for something. Sometimes we try to fill it with money, sometimes we try to fill it with sex, sometimes we try to fill it with relationships, sometimes we try to fill it with power. And normally, if you're really honest, the more you get those things, the thirst never goes away. And what's so interesting is that she was looking for Jesus the whole time, just didn't know who he was. She was expecting this Messiah, thinking somebody was going to come and change and fix and help and redeem and restore. And Jesus says, I'm the one you've been looking for. That's kind of this interaction that Jesus had with the Samaritan woman at the well. And she goes back into the city. You'll see this in a minute. And she just immediately becomes an evangelist. She didn't probably know much, if any, of the Bible, but she knew enough of her story to just begin sharing it. So I want to then pick up in John chapter 4, verse 27. The disciples had been gone for most of this, and they come back. And this is where I want to spend our time this morning. John chapter 4, verse 27. And just then, his disciples came back, and they marveled that he was talking with a woman. Jesus had shattered so many expectations and cultural taboos. He was not supposed to be talking with a Samaritan or a Samaritan woman or a sinful Samaritan woman because he had missional lenses on. He saw her so differently than everybody else that saw her. And so much so that the disciples were like, what on earth is going on? What do you seek? Or why are you talking with her? So the woman left her water jar. She went away into town and said to the people, come and see a man who told me all that I ever did. Could this be the Christ? They went out of the town and they were coming to him. So immediately this woman who was just sharing her story, it stirred so many other people up, I think, to realize maybe I'm thirsty too. My soul's looking for something. Maybe this is the Christ that we were looking for. Verse 31. Meanwhile, the disciples were urging him, saying, Rabbi, eat. But he said to them, I have food to eat that you do not know about. So the disciples said to one another, has anyone brought him something to eat? And Jesus said to them, no, my food is to do the will. You could honestly say to accomplish the mission, to do the work. My food is to do the will of him who sent me and to accomplish his work. Do you not say, there are yet 4 months and then comes the harvest? Look, I tell you, lift up your eyes and see the fields are white for harvest. Look back at verse 34. Jesus was a man on a mission. He believed he had something very specific to do, and that's the lens he saw things through. That's how he engaged with people. It's such a dangerous thing if we kind of lose that lens, which I think all of us, if you're a Christian, if you're a believer, you probably come in just like this woman, like something happens in your life, you realize Jesus has forgiven you, he's changed you, he's filled you with the Spirit, like something changes where you get real excited and you tell people. Statistically, most Christians share the gospel and share their story most within about the first 4 years of conversion. And then over time, a few things happen. Maybe more of our circle becomes Christian instead of non-Christian. And there's definitely, obviously, some real benefits to having good Christian community. But one of the things is I think we lose some of our missional urge over time. Or you could almost see it like this way. We come into this eyes up looking for opportunities, and then over time our eyes just kind of drop. And every now and then Jesus has to come in and remind us to lift up our eyes. Jesus was a man on a mission. That's why he's talking to this woman. And then Jesus reminded his disciples to live on mission. He said it this way, lift up your eyes. They missed probably this opportunity with this woman, probably just like us, so many opportunities that God put right in their path, not because they were in the wrong location, but because they had the wrong perspective. if you want to live, and I seriously pray if you're a believer, you want to live a missional life. You want God to use you to accomplish his mission, which is bigger than any of us, to have him use you as a conduit to see people's lives changed, transformed, people come to faith, people's eternities changed forever. Like, if you want to live on mission, rarely does it involve a change in location. Mostly it requires a change in perspective. Because we look up and oh my gosh, there's opportunities around me every single day. And so Jesus reminds them, hey, I'm on mission, you're on mission. Lift up your eyes, because he says the fields are ready. The fields are ready. He says they're white for the harvest. I grew up on a farm west of Amarillo, and we actually grew, it was an ostrich farm, but it was also a wheat farm. But we were dry land farming, so we didn't have any irrigation or sprinklers, which means about 80% of the time, everything was dead. Nothing grew. But when it finally grew, you could tell the wheat would get, about that high. And when it was finally time to harvest, when you could tell it was time to get the combines out, everything kind of turned white. Because the plants begin to die, the heads of the seeds are just they're dry enough, and they're ready to run a combine and to harvest it. And so, when you looked out and you saw the fields white, that means okay, harvest is ready. The harvesters better get it in gear, right? The harvest is ready, but the farmers, now it's our turn. Jesus says, "Look, I tell you, lift up your eyes and see that the fields are white for harvest." In Midland, Texas, we are not short on harvest. We are short on harvesters. That's probably been the case throughout all of Christian history, because Jesus himself in Matthew chapter 9, he says, when you pray this, pray to the Lord of the harvest, Lord, send out more workers into the fields. The problem is not that people are not ready and excited and willing to hear the gospel and to even respond to it. The problem is that so many of us over time, our eyes kind of drop and we forget to have a perspective that God is using us to live on mission. I think distractions is part of the thing where the eyes just kind of drop. But the more distracted a Christian living on mission is, the more we begin to see people not as opportunities, but as obstacles, right? Because if we have a missional lens, every single person is an opportunity to hear about the goodness, the grace, the love of God. But if we lose that, then people kind of get in our way a little bit. I remember when we moved to Midland, I felt very compelled, very called by God to be kind of missionaries to Midland, so to speak. Very missionally minded, and we've got to reach people in Midland. We desperately want people to hear the gospel, to respond, to grow in Christ. And I had that lens on. It was so strong. When we moved here, I remember the very first time I drove on the loop. I was somewhere right around the airport, the private airport on the loop going west, and I was just kind of overwhelmed. I was just looking around at all these houses. I'm like, so many people. How on earth are we going to reach them? What do they do? What do they love? What are they afraid of? What do they worship? What are their bridges to the gospel? What are their barriers to the gospel? Just thinking through, oh my gosh, so many people. How on earth are we going to get the gospel to them? So much so that everything was an opportunity. Like the lady at Starbucks, because that's where I officed for about the first year, she was probably tired of me after a few weeks, because I saw, what an opportunity, I'm going to talk to this lady. I would go to Lowe's, and the cashier there at Lowe's, I just was thinking missionally, okay, well, this is the person I'm here to try to reach. How do we reach them? Oil change. I remember having a conversation with somebody there, a person at the pump. So many opportunities going on around me. So much so that I would see certain things that I was excited about then, but just in a real moment of honesty, over time, if that urgency for God to use you to reach somebody else, if that wanes, those opportunities turn into obstacles. I was excited, I remember this, about road work. Because I saw it, and I'm like, so many people out working on the roads in Midland. What an opportunity. And now I'm like, get out of my way. I got places to go. You've torn up every road in town. Like, it's so interesting how just a change in perspective makes you aware that there are so many people around you that God wants to reach, and He has chosen to use His people and His church. But it's easy for our eyes to drop. So much going on. We're tired. We've got kids. We've got work. We've got stress. And our eyes kind of lower a bit, to which Jesus would say, lift up your eyes. This is important because this is the why behind everything that we are doing. We talked about last year 3 big things that were driving the why behind us just kind of moving in this next season. We have talked about that this is for the lost, for the city, and for the future. So I just want to remind you like what we are doing, and if you lift up your eyes, you realize there are a lot of non-Christians, but I would say lost people in Midland, Texas. Okay, it's hard to get a number on how many people live in Midland with the census, but let's just say it's around 150,000 people. On average, a study that I saw not too long ago was about 12,000 people are committed to a local church. And let's just assume, which is a dangerous assumption, that everybody that goes to church is a Christian. It's not true, okay? First of all, in Midland, one of the hardest things is to convince people they need Jesus and they need the gospel, even if they're moral, good, upstanding citizens. But let's just say all 12,000, that leaves how many? A lot, right? 138,000 people in our city that probably, a good chunk of them think they're Christians and they're not, and they're in incredible danger. Unless we learn to lift up our eyes, we're not going to see the city the way that Jesus does. So much need, so much incredible need for people in our city to know and to hear the gospel. So many people are filled with brokenness. They're lonely. Gosh, Americans are lonelier every year, it seems like. They're fearful. Maybe they have shame from what they have done or what's been done to them. Maybe there's so many things in common with what that woman experienced that tens of thousands of people in our city might be in the same position. Maybe they're idolatrous. Maybe they're just overridden with guilt, sin. There's a lot of ways that can express itself, but there is unbelievable, overwhelming need in Midland for people to hear the gospel. Second thing, we've said often, this is for the city. That woman's testimony changed that city. She went back, she starts talking. She didn't know all the right verses to use, but she shares her testimony. People get super curious. They do what you should do if you share your testimony. They go back to get the answer to Jesus. And so they go meet Jesus, and it says tons and tons of people were responding to Christ in this city. This city was different because of what Jesus had done with her and because of her testimony. I've heard quite a few times over this past year as this building is going up that some people say, oh, y'all are here to stay. Yeah, we have an opportunity to do something that's going to create a gospel culture full of gospel preaching and gospel people that's going to last way longer in this city than you and I will. We're for the lost, we're for the city. Our city needs Jesus, our city needs healthy churches. And also, this big why behind this for us is for the future. You might have seen the study that happened in Midland a year or two ago. So the average age in Midland, Texas is 32 years old. And the biggest group of people is 2-year-olds, and all those that served in Redeemer Kids said, it's true, it is true. Half of them are over there right now. We want to be people that are about the future, not just ourselves. And what's really interesting, I thought about this morning. We prayed for this a year ago this month. We said, God, we want to do something that's going to bless somebody that's not even here yet. And now some of you, that's you. You're here. And you weren't here a year ago. And we have been thinking and praying and preparing and giving for the future. What's the why behind this? The fields are ready for the harvest. It's for the lost, for the city, for the future. People are thirsty. Okay, the problem with a place like Midland is we can kind of keep chasing the thirst a little bit. Think, well, I was thirsty. I thought I needed something new. I bought it. It kind of wore off. I'll go buy something bigger and better. And you can do that your whole life. Like our city is full of people that are thirsty, They're looking for like true meaning and connection and intimacy, and they're trying to find in sex, and it's not working, and they don't know they're actually looking for Jesus. That they're looking for some type of affirmation, and so they try to find it in work, become maybe workaholics or whatever it might be. There's so much thirst in our city, and I love the way that, I can't remember who it was, it might have been Tim Keller. He said, one of our jobs as Christians is to help people see that they're looking for Jesus. Like everything they're doing is searching for Jesus, and if they reject him, they'll never be able to stop looking for him. Our city is incredibly thirsty, so Jesus would say, lift up your eyes. It's so funny how people find what they're looking for. Right? You find generally what you're looking for or what you're expecting, and if you begin looking for opportunities for God to use you and speak to people and encourage somebody and invite someone to church, you will see opportunities everywhere, every day. Lift up your eyes. So maybe who in your family has been right there all along, but you lift up your eyes and realize maybe God has put me here to say something to that person. Who on your street, new neighbor you've met, you have an opportunity, if you lift up your eyes, to see them as God does, to invite them into your home. What about a friend or a coworker? God has put you in their life for a reason. We lift up our eyes and invite them to church, share the gospel with them. I want to share a story. It's actually an email that I got just a few days ago, and I'm probably going to tear up as I do this because it was very meaningful to me on a handful of levels. I read it to the staff a couple days ago, and just a lot of weeping. It's a pretty moving thing. A couple weeks ago, we were in our Next Steps class, which we do once a month. And if you are curious, your best first step is what? Next Steps. Like, I feel like it's YouTube where they just kind of randomly throw a little ad in there. I was at our Next Steps class, had about 30, 35 people in there, and everybody was introducing themselves, and it got to this woman, and she introduced herself, and she said her name was Mary Ann. And something kind of like warm sunk into my heart. I said, oh man, my mother's name was Mary Ann, and she's been gone for a long time. I miss her, and you actually remind me of her in a lot of ways. And she starts telling a little of her story. She said, I grew up Catholic. I said, oh, my mother grew up Catholic, and she had never heard the gospel until she was in her 20s when she read in Timothy that there's one mediator between God and man, the man Christ Jesus. And she's like, oh my gosh, I don't need to tell my sin to the priest. I need to tell it to Jesus, and he once and for all can be the mediator and forgive me before God. So like that was kind of my mom's story. And I got to hear a little bit of Mary Ann's story, and she said, we've gotten permission to share this. She was 73 years old, and she said, I don't know much about the Bible, don't know how to read it. And somebody in that class, a young woman that was sitting behind her, lifted up her eyes and saw that as an opportunity and said, I will read the Bible with you. And it's like, what an incredible thing is happening in the Next Steps class. And then she's like, I really feel like I need to find a place to serve and to give back. And lo and behold, Chase Bost, who always has his eyes up, lifted up his eyes. It's like, what an opportunity. You can join the Connections team. And then somebody else in the church lifted up their eyes and realized maybe she needs some encouragement in this season that she is in. I wanted to find a way to demonstrate how powerful it is when a church lifts up their eyes. Like what kind of church that creates, how that helps and serves so many people and in so many different ways. The fields in Midland are ripe for the harvest. We need churches that are lifting up their eyes. And I was thinking, how can I get this across? Because stats just don't do it, right? Like I could share numbers. Oh, here's how many baptisms we had, and here's how many community groups we have, and here's all these things. And it's like, cool, I guess. I mean, they're numbers, they're helpful, but they don't really get to the heart of what's going on. And I was thinking through, how do I share this? And then just got this email. And honestly, there's so many stories that we could share. I'm sure you could share so many stories about someone who was looking for community, and they found it in the church. Maybe they're filled with shame about their past and need to hear the gospel of grace. Maybe some type of addiction and need some type of love and support. We've all got so many stories of the need that's being met in Jesus' church. But as I was thinking about this, I got this email and thought I would just read this. The letter goes like this. I know many times as a church staff, you do not know the full impact you have on people's lives, and I would say this extends well beyond the staff to the church. So I just wanted to reach out and thank you from the bottom of my heart for how you guys have loved and ministered to my mom, Marianne. It's from Marianne's son. She's an amazing woman, and unfortunately over the last 2 years went through divorce after 37 years of marriage. During that time, from the divorce until now, my mother was floating. She was trying to make the best of the situation, but in her own words, she was trying to find her purpose. Thirsty. My wife and I encouraged her to get plugged into a church, and with her being new in her faith, she was very intimidated to put herself out there. I can only imagine what it is like to be a 73-year-old woman trying to find your way in life and your faith. And when she heard that Josh, one of our staff members, one of our pastors is Josh Gatewood, so when she heard that Josh was at Redeemer, she immediately wanted to visit. She loves Josh's teaching and his heart so much, I can honestly say I don't think there's been another person in her spiritual life that has made a bigger impact than Josh. So thank you so much, Josh. My brother and I are eternally grateful for you. I just got off the phone with her, and I am near tears as I hear my mother say she's so happy, so fulfilled, she feels so welcomed, and has found her place and her purpose. She's now a greeter on Sundays. You didn't know this, but if you lift up your eyes, you probably walked right past her. She was probably holding the door for you this morning. She's a greeter on Sundays, and in her words, she said very emphatically, I absolutely love it. So many people have welcomed her with open arms, whether that was sitting with her at the last function where guys were talking about the building, or the new members class where a young lady offered to teach her how to study the Bible, or the 3 other ladies who are my mom's age that saved her a seat on Sunday. You guys have shown her what the church truly is. The church is not a building. It's the people inside it. And whatever you guys are doing, I want to encourage you and let you know you're doing it right. Maybe not perfect, but what I do know is that Redeemer Church has impacted my mother more than words could ever express. So thank you from a loving son who just wants to see my mom happy. Thank you again. Keep loving Jesus and loving people. There's tens of thousands of people in our city that need Christians to lift up their eyes. You don't have to change locations. We have to change our perspective to see people as loved by God, maybe missed by others, broken, confused, lonely, beat down, whatever it might be. Jesus said, lift up your eyes. The fields are white, ready for the harvest. That's the why behind what we're doing. We should never lose sight of it. God is doing his work, accomplishing his mission, sharing his gospel, giving grace, changing lives through us. Let's pray. Father, I admit that it is easy for my eyes to drop, to droop, to get tired, to look down at my own situation, my own circumstances, my responsibilities. And I'm so grateful for the reminder to lift up our eyes. I'm reminded in Ephesians when you say that you have prepared good works in advance that we should walk in them. Every single one of us today will walk past a person that needs encouragement, that needs prayer, that needs the gospel, that needs a friend. Help us to be people that lift up our eyes constantly. I pray that Midland, Texas is a very, very different place because you're using us. God, thank you for the people in this room that have consistently lifted up their eyes to see needs and to serve people. I pray that you would bless them for that. For those whose eyes have dropped, I pray that you would remind us to lift them up. What a blessing it is for you to use us to bless someone else. I pray that we'd be reminded often that the church is not a building. The building is a tool for the family of God to worship, to use. God, we want to use it not as a couch to be comfortable, but as a front porch to engage people in our city for the glory of Christ. We love you, Jesus. We thank you. We praise you.